Hernán, no te escucho.
Ahí me escuchas, buenos días.
Perfecto, ya.
Bueno, gracias.
Gracias. Otra vez el micrófono. Hola. Estoy viviendo un sueño hecho realidad. I got a microphone. It's like my dream come true. I'm actually here to pass the microphone to, as I say, where's Jaime? There he is. El jefe de mi jefe. To Dr. Arthur Evans, who has a PowerPoint. Okay, great. Which we'll figure out here momentarily. But so, okay. Talk amongst yourselves. Que sigan conversando. It's really, I mentioned, I think yesterday briefly when Sophia and I had a moment to sort of talk about yesterday and today, that we were really fortunate that the leaders of our organizations, Dr. Evans and Dr. Rodriguez in Portugal, believed in the potential of working on hard issues as a global team and have been supportive from the very beginning and very involved along the way. So I'm honored and grateful that Dr. Evans came to Bogota to join us, and also delighted for him to share his thoughts about organizational objectives and achievements. I think that's the, as we start the day. Thank you.
Buenos días. Oh, hi. Okay. Buenos días. In my country, I am Baptist, and when the pastor speaks to the congregation, they speak back, so that's what I want, okay? Buenos dias. Good, very good. All right, so this morning I'm going to be brief, no matter how long it takes. Okay, so I thought, can you turn it down a little bit? So I thought what I might do, I thought yesterday's speakers were really, really good. I thought they set a really good foundation for us. So I don't think there's a lot that I need to say this morning, but because most of my career, I have been involved in initiatives to do new things, I thought I would share with you a few things that we might want to consider as we are doing the work. Everybody with me? Thank you. You learn fast. Okay, good. So let me tell you the first thing that I think matters. I think context matters. When we met in Portugal, in Lisbon, in 2019, and now as we meet today, the world is very different. People are different. Let me give you an example. We knew, psychologists all over the world knew that when the pandemic started, excuse me, that we were going to see a significant rise in mental health. We knew that because we knew that people were under stress. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of loss. Many people lost people that they loved. And at the same time, all of those things were happening, we were taking away from people something that psychologists know is critical for our mental health, and that is our social connections, because people had to isolate. So we had this increased stress, decreased social support, and we knew that we were going to see that. Well, that day has arrived. Let me give you some data from the United States, just to give you an example. And I know that the data looks very similar in other parts of the world. We know that in our population, that there are people who are experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression at a rate of 3 to 4 times what it was before the pandemic. We know that children are experiencing a lot of stress, because what we know is that more parents are taking their children to psychiatric or to hospitals in crisis at a rate of about 30% higher than before the crisis, before the pandemic. We know that people have been affected both mentally and physically. In the US, about 2/3 of our population has had unwanted weight changes. About 1/3 of them have lost weight, didn't want to, and about 2/3 have gained weight who didn't want to. Now, I'm unfortunately on the gain side. I don't think I gained weight. What happened was during COVID, a lot of our clothes shrunk. Does that happen to you? Clothes shrunk, and now they don't fit. So that's what I think really happened. I don't think it was weight gain. So taken together, all of this data that we have tells us that our populations are very different. They are traumatized, they are stressed, and we know from trauma research that when people are exposed to trauma, that the effects can last sometimes up to a decade or longer. We know that from research after big events in the United States like our 9/11 attacks. And so we know that the issues that we're dealing with are not acute and will go away when the pandemic hopefully goes away soon. But they're things that are going to be along with us. So if we're thinking about how we help people from a health standpoint, we got to think about how that shapes our thinking. Another issue is that framing matters. And one of the things that I think all of us probably have experienced in our own countries is when we first talk about issues like climate change to people, many times they are wondering, why are psychologists talking about climate change? Right? At least in the US, that's what we experience. Because they frame the issue as an environmental issue. They don't frame the issue as an issue of human behavior. And there are a lot of issues that we believe are important for psychologists to make a contribution to that are framed in a way that eliminates the human element. So if climate change is about the environment, well, there's not a lot of room for what we do. If climate change is about how people have changed our world, then there's a lot. And many of the issues that we deal with will have to be reframed so that it is clear why psychology is important. Our history matters. I thought one of the interesting things that people talked about yesterday was our history. They didn't quite put it in terms of history, but they talked about the culture of psychology. And I think there are two things that sometimes get in our way of having impact on issues. One of them is how we're trained as psychologists. So my early training, even though I'm a clinical psychologist, my early training was in experimental psychology. In experimental psychology, we never say something unless we have the data. Well, a lot of the challenges that we're dealing with, we don't have the data. We have some data, but we don't have often the precise data. And so one of the things that gets in our way is that our training tells us we shouldn't speak on an issue unless we have sufficient data to make a statement. But that's not the way the world works. For 20 years, I spent my career in public policy. 20 years of my career, because I did things before that. And for policymakers, politicians, decision makers, they're dealing with really complex issues for which we have not done randomized controlled studies. But we have some data and we have some knowledge that can be applied to those issues. And so the way I started to think as a psychologist working in public policy is, how do I increase the probability that the decisions that we make and the actions that we take are going to be things that increase the probability that we get the outcome that we want? Everybody with me? Someone said that they have to drink water when they speak English. Well, that's me too. So our history, how we're trained, gets in the way. The other thing that gets in the way is that the way we're trained often doesn't put us in a position of thinking of ourselves as leaders. There are others, professions, you can probably think of some, where out of the gate, they are taught that they are leaders, that they should sit at the front of the table. And so if we're going to have a movement to infuse psychology and psychological science into the big issues of the day, we have to think of ourselves as leaders and feel comfortable with that. So I'm glad that this group is taking on the issue of leadership, because that's going to be really critical for us to be successful. So our history matters, and we have to think about how we overcome our history if we're going to have impact. Infrastructure matters. It's not just what we want to do, it's how are we going to do it. And I think that we're going to come up with some great ideas about what we can do. But I'm also very aware that if we're going to be successful, we have to think about, well, what are the resources that we need? Do we have the capacity? How do we sustain it over a long period of time? So we can initiate things and start things, but we're going to have to give as much thought to how we sustain it as we give to what are the things that we think are important. Everybody still with me? I only got two more, okay? Dos. Okay. Culture matters. And a lot of our speakers yesterday spoke about the importance of culture. And I want to just highlight why it's important from our standpoint. Whether we're talking about climate, whether we're talking about global health or health within our nations, there are always communities that are marginalized. They sit on the margins of our society. They're small sometimes. They don't have a lot of voice sometimes. And whatever we do, we need to make sure that we are reaching out to those communities, that we're thinking about those communities, that we don't do what often happens in the United States, which is we design something and then we say, oh yeah, there's that group over there. Instead of thinking about them at the very beginning and designing something that is inclusive of all of the communities within our society. Everybody still with me? Last one. What we're doing matters. If anyone who's ever heard me speak, at some point I will probably say something like, I love being a psychologist. I really do. I think this is what I was born to do, is to be a psychologist. And I love being a psychologist because at the heart of what we do is about people. It's about making people's lives better. And what we're trying to do is something that has never been done in our field before. It probably hasn't been done in any field before that I can think of, where we are working globally to take on complex, some of the most complex issues in our world. And we're trying to figure out how we organize ourselves to do that, how we think about what the work is, how we are going to actually make impact. but I'm pretty convinced that we're going to be successful. The question that I think we have to ask ourselves is, why us, why now? Why you? Is it an accident that you emerged as a leader in your country at this particular time? I don't think it's an accident. I think we're here for a specific purpose. So I think as we do this work, we not only have to have the head, the intellect about it, we also have to have the heart, because that's why we got into the field. So I hope I've shared with you a few ideas for you to think about, for us to incorporate in the work. I'm excited about what we're going to do, and I just look forward to working with all of you as we change the world. Thank you.
It's me again. I'm just going to do a brief introduction of our next speaker, who's with us by video. If you ever have a chance to meet him, I was fortunate to talk with him on Zoom a couple times. I think that he's just extraordinary in terms of head and heart, as Arthur was saying, of taking, big risks in some ways in terms of how we think about our interactions with the environment and mental health. And so thank you to our colleagues from the Korean Psychological Association for making this happen. Jin Yoon, Ki Hong, June, I'm so glad you're here. So Dr. Juan Sabshin is a psychologist and researcher in South Korea. I think that he's extraordinary. I meant to send you some of his papers in case you have some free time. Want to read a little literature, but he's done intriguing research on forest therapy with adolescents. And when I talk about that with folks in the line at the grocery store or that sort of thing, the typical response I get is, oh yeah, my kid went to summer camp. It's obviously the kind of thing we get when you say you're a psychologist, like I watch Laura en las Americas or something. I'm like, it's not really the same. But he's going to talk to us about his work. What's really fascinating, I think, for us as the Alliance is how he's done this research and turned it into public policy in South Korea. He has a formal relationship, that kind of work, the forest therapy, with what for me would be the equivalent of our National Park Service. And so when we're thinking about creating, taking psychology from science to its applications and turning it into part of what our leaders do as policy, or the kinds of things that might filter down into schools or programs for youth, or just ways of living. He's done an extraordinary job of collaborating at the government level. So taking this kind of clinical approach through research to policy. Did you want to add anything, June? Am I missing? Are you sure? Okay. So with that, I'll let him, Dr. Juan Sab, go ahead and speak.
is forested and mountainous country. Korea has nearly 64% of forest area out of total national land. Most of forest areas owned by private. Only 25% of forests are owned by central government. The large portions of private forest are sometimes harder to manage forest, mainly because the private owners have very small portions of forest and they don't have an interest to manage their forest. This is the graph showing that the growing stocks of Korea forest is increasing, even though the forest areas are decreasing by the year. As you can see from the graph, Korea has bare forest land only a half centuries ago. Now, Korea is admired as a successful restoration of forest country in the world. Korea has about more than 165 cubic meters of growing stock per hectare right now. I like to talk about the value and benefits from forest. This is the taxonomy of a benefit produced by forest. As you can see from the table, the forest provided lots of tangible and intangible benefits, and all of them are influencing on humans' well-being and the qualities of life. Recently, among the forest benefits, therapeutic or health benefit from forest are emerging because our society is getting industrialization and urbanization. As all of us know, the urbanization is double sword. It is provided lots of opportunity, such as economic gains, jobs, and convenience of living. However, urbanization also makes people far away from the traditional relations with the nature and forest. Even though the forest therapy or health benefit from forest is now attracted by researchers and other areas for implementation, the using forest for health purposes has a long history. I found a book published in London in 1919. It was very surprising for me at the time. The author documented very well on the benefit from forest in detail. One of the typical theories in forest therapy is attention restoration theory, developed by Kaplans in 1989. According to the ALT, natures, including forest, is the best places to restore in mentally, psychologically, and also physically, due to nature has 4 important components. The first component is being away, which refers to the sense of being separated and apart from one's usual thought and concern. The second component is fascination. Fascination involves one's attention being held without any effort expended. In other words, restorative environment hold your attention without you having to focus or direct in certain way. Extent component refer to qualities of restorative environment that encourage you to feel totally immersed and engaged. It means that the environment does not have any unusual or unexpected features, and you feel comfortable and at ease in environment. Finally, the compatibility component is all about feeling enjoyment and encourage in your environment. Why the forest and health is important in Korea? With this abundance of Korea forest resources, Korea is trying to deliver health and happy to the public through the forest. There are several reasons why those forest therapy needed and important in Korea. The first, as I mentioned before, we have an abundance of forest which can be accessed anywhere and anytime in any places in Korea. The second, traditionally, we Korean people have lived with the forest harmoniously. In other words, forests are always part of our life and using forest as a routine life. Third, Korea is the country which has rapid economic development. The rapid economic growth has dark sides such as high competition, high urbanization rate, and high densities of population. Economic development and urbanization provide some opportunities such as job creation. However, the result of this effect, people in urban areas living far away from the traditional harmonious relations with the nature and forest. And lastly, like other countries, Korea is getting super aging society. So the forest resources can play an important role as a preventive medicine for public, especially the senior citizens. To implement the forest as a public health and people's welfare, Forest Welfare Promotion Act was proclaimed and effected in March of 2016. This is a landmark legislation to improve people's health and happiness using forests across the Korea countries. This legislation, as far as I understand, is the first cases in the world to use the forest as a people's well-being resources. The forest policy titled Forest Welfare with the People's Life Cycle is a flagship policy of forest and health and also welfare in Korea. The policy's purpose is to provide the tailored forest welfare services and facilities according to the people's life cycle. For example, from the birth to death, forest services program and facilities are provided for any stages of people to increase their health and happiness from forest. From the cradle to grave happiness should be delivered with this icon policy. As I mentioned before, the Forest Welfare Promotion Act make possible to designate therapeutic forest and forest therapy center to spread forest therapy into the public by Korea Forest Service. As far, there are 37 forests designated and run by central, local government, and private. This map indicated 15 locations of forest therapy centers run by central government. More broadly, this map shows comprehensive locations of forest therapy centers which are running and under the construction in Korean Peninsula. green dot indicate National Forest Therapy Center, and the red are the public or private centers, and the blue dots are under the construction. So altogether, nearly 70 forest therapy facilities have been run across the country in a couple of years. To combat increasing demand for using forest for public health and psychological well-being, Korea Forest Service has announced many strategies for forest management for post-pandemic and disease prevention. Among them, the following are some ambitious projects. First, plan to increase numbers of people using forest therapy participation. Last year, there are 18,000 of people participated in forest therapy program. The goals of participants this year is 26,000. Second, plan to increase average of using day in forest therapy from 6 to 8 days per capita. The third, plan to increase the supply of forest welfare facility. There are around 2,135 places running, including therapy forest. According to the plan, the government tries to increase the facility to 3,683 places. Lastly, the plan to increase numbers of people using forest welfare voucher. Forest welfare vouchers are issued for economic and social vulnerable people for using the forest welfare facility and services without burden sharing. Last year, 1,040,000 people benefited. Korean government plans to increase the double numbers of people who benefit the forest therapy benefits in this year. So far, I introduced some strategy and plans about the forest and health in Korea. Korea is a country standing in front line for using forest for public health or psychological well-being and welfare. I hope our effort resulted fruitfully for people's health and happiness through the forest. I think, however, the forest and health is still a black box. This means we all know the forest provides health benefit, but we still don't know about the large portions of mechanism, why and how the forest provide health benefit. Research on this area are very significant important to implement forest therapy in many areas or practices. The Chungbuk National University, located in the middle part of Korean Peninsula, has unique graduate department to contribute evidence-based research on therapeutic benefit of forest. This is the pictures using the therapeutic forest in Korea. The peoples with disability using these forest areas with barrier-free road. And this is the scene and the pictures for performing the programs in therapeutic forest and accommodations for overnight users in the forest therapy areas. This is one of the typical forest therapy centers in Korea, and the therapeutic road in Korea, and the people using the forest for their health purposes. Also, many people are using these forest areas, especially the cancer patient in Korea. The unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic has put a damper on everyday lives in every aspect. However, people's interest and desire to use forest for health are getting stronger than ever. The COVID-19 pandemic we have experienced is deepening our concern regarding the importance and utilizations of forest in relation to our health. In the post-COVID era, the loss of forest, especially in the area of health and psychological well-being, will become greater and more significant. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, we're going to move now into the working session for today. And so we'd like you all to just go back outside to the tables you were at yesterday and take your places, and we'll brief you outside. Thank you.
Will this work out here?
Of course.